So today's topic is storytelling, but storytelling is so big that I wanted to just kind of chunk it down. So today's topic, we're going to talk about character within storytelling. And we're going to talk about character within kind of traditional storytelling. And then we're going to talk about character as a speaker and how you can use character as a speaker, because there's actually a lot of different ways you can use character when you're not using storytelling at all. But it's just really useful for you as a speaker that you can do it. So I'm going to talk about those two different situations. But first, I'm going to talk about it in the traditional storytelling sense, because why not? That makes most sense, right? That's where most people think of character coming from. And the wonderful thing about character is not only does it bring your talk to life. So when we're speaking, we want to find different ways of being engaging with the audience, and character is a wonderful way to do that because it's a little bit more performative, it's a little bit more fun, it's more playful, but also it saves you time. Because all those boring, like he said, she said, that happens in writing that is necessary, although in really good writing, sometimes they manage to get rid of some of them, but it's really difficult, in writing, you have to have all these, and then she said this, and then he said, you don't need any of that in speaking because you can show it with character. And it can really help streamline a story. It can really help kind of cut out any extra bits that you're like, oh, the story just it's not punchy enough. If your story isn't feeling punchy enough, adding character instead of narration can really help. So the difference between character and narration is, if I was narrating a story out loud, I would say, I walked up to her and then she said, "Hey, how are you doing?" And I said, "Well, it's a beautiful day and things are going well." And then she made a face and walked away. I don't know, just making it up. But, that would be narration. Whereas if I was doing that in kind of character, it would be, I was walking down the street and I saw my friend. "Hey, how you doing?" I've forgotten what I said already. It was like, "Hey, how you doing?" "Oh, I don't know. How are you?" "Oh, I'm wonderful. The life is good. The sun is shining." Oh, and she walked away. And I don't need to say any of that. She said, I did this. I don't even need to say that she made a face because I can just make the face. That was all very, very just made up on the spot. I should probably plan these things. So character can not only make your talks engaging, but it can save you a lot of time, is what I'm saying. So there were two different ways that we can show character. Ideally, you want to use both if you're doing a traditional storytelling kind of setting, because you want these characters to be very strong and full. But when we're using it in the non-traditional setting, we typically only use one or the other. So the two different ways that we kind of build character, show character in storytelling, is we angle our body and our eye line. So that's the first one. We change our body. So you can either angle it. This is kind of the most obvious way, is just to angle. If I'm talking to someone who is over there, when I'm me, I'm looking this way, and when I'm them, I'm looking that way. That is like basic 101 characters. That's fine, but it can get a bit much if you're doing it all the time. And especially if you overdo it, if you kind of full stand in profile, then it takes too long to switch and it looks a bit silly. Sometimes it can just be, the tilt of your chin. It doesn't even need to be, you don't need to move your weight in your hips or anything. It could just be the tilt of a chin. It doesn't need to be a full movement. I see a lot of people just, they want to move their feet. It's too much. You can just move your chin. You don't need to move your whole body. But that can get a bit much. And what if you have multiple characters, and what if they're not talking to each other? Then that gets a little bit different. So that is just the basic. There's two people talking to each other. I turn one way for one person. I turn the other way for the other person. Their eye lines meet in the middle. Everyone knows that I'm being two different people. It's kind of like sock puppets. This person's talking and then this person's talking. That's a fun way to do character too. But that's just very, very simple, and it doesn't bring any life to the actual character itself. So something that's a little bit better to do is to change your body posture in some way. Usually we do this in a very kind of stereotypical, broad way, because we're looking for something very fast, something very indicative. So if I'm playing a teenager, I might put my hand on my hip, or if I'm being, the angry boss, I might put both hands on my hips and kind of lift my shoulders and scrunch up my face. So, you don't have to go stereotypically, but a lot it's a shorthand. It's very easy to do. Stereotypes exist. Stereotypes exist because they're a shorthand. So you can choose to do that or not. But just being aware of what your posture is as the speaker and the narrator, what that posture is like, and then just changing something about it. It doesn't need to be a stereotype. It could just be a tilt of the head. It could be a lift of the sternum or drop of the sternum. It could be one shoulder moving forward or standing on one hip, just something to indicate something about the character. And that is when we're getting into posture, that's when you can show something about the character instead of just being like one way or the other. If they're very confident, you'd probably lift the sternum. If they're very shy, you might put your arms in front of your body. It doesn't need to be a lot, but just something small to indicate it's a different person. And then use that gesture or that posture every time you play that character. So every time that character comes up in the talk, you will always at least start from that position, or maybe not do exactly the same hand movement, but something similar, so that your audience has a quick anchor to that character. I know that it's, we don't want to do our characters an injustice because they are obviously three-dimensional people, but within storytelling, sometimes it's quite helpful to have something that indicates a character, like a certain hat, or, when you're doing kind of full-on performative storytelling, you'd have like a different hat for each character. We're not doing that. We're just going to adopt a slightly different posture. So that's the first thing, is that you can change your body. You can change your posture. You can change the angle of your body. You can change the way you are standing to indicate the character. The other thing you can do, and you don't need to do both, you can do just one or the other. The other thing that you can do is you can change your voice. You can change your body, or you can change your voice. And again, this doesn't need to be true to life. It doesn't need to be a big change. It can be a very small change. So when I was doing the characters earlier and I said, "Oh, hey, how are you?" I mean, that's still my voice, but I was being kind of me, the character. And so I made myself a little bit more, I don't know, excitable and lifted the pitch a little bit, not consciously. It's often not a conscious thing, but you'll notice you do this when you imitate people. Already, you do this already. You do this in life. When you are talking about someone else, you already do this. You imitate them. So think about how you do that. What is your go-to? Do you lower your voice? I tend to have different voices for kind of the attitude that someone has in a story. So if I'm venting to someone after a long day and I'm complaining about somebody, usually it's, and they said this and it was like so stupid. I tend to stick my jaw out and bring my voice down a little bit. Or if I'm want to indicate someone was kind of naggy and annoying, then my voice will go up a little bit. They're just like, they're so annoying, and I put my voice in my nose because I find that really annoying. So, when you're doing this in life, start to notice what your go-to voices are. You already have some. You have some voices that you use in storytelling, and they may be nothing like the real person. But for you, there's an indicator, there's an emotional indicator there. And so you can use those voices in your storytelling. So if you're using a teenager, for example, their voice might be a little bit more higher pitched because they're younger, or it might have more of an attitude, like a little bit more of twang on it because they're a teenager and they're being all attitude-y, maybe. I don't know. Not all teenagers have attitude. I did. And then, if it's a boss, maybe it's got a louder, lower voice. You don't need to go to extremes, though. I naturally do because I'm a very performative kind of person. I play a lot with my voice. But it can really be as simple as, if I'm talking and now I want to be Jane, Jane has a slightly higher voice than me. And even though it's not very different from my regular voice, when I switch back, you'll notice. And so it's not so much about the voice being accurate or even indicating something necessarily. It's just about us noticing the difference. So all you need to do is do a voice that is slightly different from your own, but then remember how it's different from your own so you can repeat it. Hope that makes sense. So we're doing this character. Maybe we're not going to change, body language much. Maybe we don't feel comfortable doing that, but we're going to change our voice a little bit. So, I was walking down the street and I saw Jane and she said, "Hey, how you doing?" And then I said, "Oh, I'm fine." So, just up a little bit, down a little bit. That's all you need to do. It doesn't need to be complicated. I know people get really intimidated by character. The possibilities are endless. The potential is endless. There is so much you can do, but you don't have to. You can start small. So We can change our body language and we can change our voice. Now, when we're doing traditional storytelling, when we have like more fully developed characters and they're going to show up again and again, then we need to keep that consistent. We need to keep the eye line consistent, and we need to keep the body, the indicative posture consistent, and we need to keep the voice consistent. So whatever voice that character had earlier in the story, I need to be able to recreate that voice again later. So if she had a higher voice earlier in the story, she'd better have a higher voice later in the story. I can't just keep playing around with it. I want to keep that is her voice. And then if I have another character, they have a different voice. Now, that's for traditional storytelling. But the cool thing about character is that it can come up in really interesting ways when we're not telling a story. So one of my favorite things to do with speakers, and especially with technical speakers, is to bring in elements of storytelling when you're not telling a story, when you're doing a technical presentation, or you're doing something else completely. You can bring in elements of storytelling that can really bring your talk to life. For example, anytime you use a quote, you should be changing your voice a little bit, because that quote is not you. That's not you speaking. So if you were to quote, oh no, I need a quote. Okay, I've got one. One of my favorite acting teachers of all time, Larry Silverberg, he teaches in the US. Well, actually, he teaches internationally, but he's based in the US, and he runs the True Acting Institute. And one of my favorite quotes of his is, "Technique creates the circumstances within which the miraculous can occur." So I'll just say that again because I stumbled. So my favorite quote of Larry Silverberg's is, "Technique creates the circumstances within which the miraculous can occur." Now, I'm not really doing a character there, but I'm using one of the elements of character in that I'm changing my voice just a little bit. It's still me, it's still my voice, but it's just changed a tiny little bit so that you can hear this is a quote. And so my audience, when they're listening, they know that that isn't part of my general narrative. That isn't part of me just kind of chit-chatting. That is something special. It makes it stand out. It's like putting quotes around it or putting it in a colored box. If we were looking at it on the page, it makes it stand out and people are like, oh, that's a quote. And so you can do this for quotes. You can do it for, statistics and that kind of thing. You can also do it when we're embodying attitudes. We're not really storytelling, but we can bring people in to show different points of view. For example, some people will, when I'm teaching storytelling, some people will say, yeah, but Danielle, you're an actor, you've done this forever. Like, it's not so easy for the rest of us. And that's a character. It's not, it's not a story. I'm not telling a story. I'm just saying, this is something that sometimes people say to me, and I have to explain that, this is a skill that everyone can learn. But, I can embody that perspective with a voice. Or sometimes people come to me and they say, Danielle, it's easy for you because you're so extroverted and stuff, but I'm like super shy and I don't know how to do characters. And that again, I'm not telling a story. I'm not, going from A to B to C, but I'm bringing in perspectives. And so we can do this with testimonials. We can do this with any problem solution. When we are introducing a problem, we can introduce it from different perspectives. So if my problem is we don't have enough sales in our team, our team's not making enough sales, then, I might, doing a presentation, I might say, as you can see by this chart, we're not making enough sales. Now, some people may say, ooh, this is definitely the accounting department's fault. They're not doing blah, blah, blah. And other people may say, oh, yeah, well, I was on a holiday, so, I wasn't really doing, don't do that because that sounds like throwing blame. That was a really bad example. Again, like I said, I should really prepare these. But do you know what I mean? Like bringing in perspective and showing something, obviously be as compassionate as you can with perspective. We don't ever want to hurt anyone's feelings. But it's just a fun way to embody different attitudes, different perspectives, and different problems that come up. And so, if you've interviewed people and you've got anecdotal evidence or anything like that, you can create different voices for them. Make sure that they are compassionate and kind voices, because we may not think of it not being compassionate and kind at the moment. And I hope I haven't offended anyone. I'm just thinking, gosh, my go-to voices I think are very fun, but I hope I haven't offended anyone by the voices that I've used. You want to think through that, as I am thinking through it now. Too late, but it doesn't need to be a huge difference. It can be a very small difference in your voice, and it can just bring things to life a little bit. It can separate the ideas from each other so that people have more to grab onto.